The arrested president now faces an official detention warrant being sought over insurrection charges. He continues refusing to show up for questioning at the Corruption Investigation Office. The political trouble poses greater pressure on the nation's economy, according to the latest assessment by the Finance Ministry. Israeli attacks on Gaza have continued after the ceasefire deal, killing more Palestinians. Amid what looks to be a fragile situation, Israel has confirmed the deal with Hamas. It's January 17th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with the latest on the investigation by the anti-corruption officials who have applied for an official detention warrant against President Yoon. For more, Arirang's Kim Bo-kyung joins us live from the Gwacheon government complex, where the anti-graft agency is located. Bo-kyung, so the CIO has now applied for that detention warrant. It's another unprecedented event for a sitting president.
That's right, Jung-min. The CIO requested the detention warrant against President Yoon just before 6 p.m., around 3 hours before the deadline, filing the request with the Seoul Western District Court. And this marks the first time in South Korea's history where a sitting president faces a formal arrest. If the detention warrant is issued, Yoon can be held for a total of 20 days, including the initial 48-hour detention period. The CIO will likely hold and question Yoon for 8 more days before transferring the case to the prosecution, which has the authority to indict a suspect. Both parties have already agreed to spend 10 days each questioning Yoon. And with the detention warrant requested, the court is going to conduct a review tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eyes are now on whether President Yoon will attend the review, and if he does so, it will be his first appearance outside after being detained. Meanwhile, Yoon shared a message from the detention center via his lawyer around half an hour after the CIO requested the warrant, saying he is doing well, although it's quite uncomfortable, and that he has been looking back on state affairs through speeches he made. And he expressed gratitude for those who have been out on the streets supporting him.
And this filing for a detention warrant comes after President Yoon again refused to appear for questioning today.
That's right, Jung-min. He was supposed to be here at 10 a.m. For questioning, but again refused to appear. And his refusal comes after failing to appear the previous day too, citing his health conditions. One CIO official said that there has been no notification from Yoon's side over his non-attendance this time around. The CIO did not resummon Yoon as the 48-hour deadline to detain him was approaching, which is at around 9 p.m. Friday. Yoon not appearing is not a surprise, as his legal team had already expressed regret over the Seoul Central District Court's decision on Thursday to dismiss the request to challenge his detention. Yoon had filed a petition to the Seoul Central District Court seeking a review of the legality of his detention, arguing the detention warrant against him issued by the Seoul Western District Court was invalid and that the CIO lacked jurisdiction over insurrection. This, however, was only to be rejected, and Yoon's lawyers have said it is unfortunate how illegal and unlawful actions are tolerated and that they will not comply with the CIO's investigations.
Meanwhile, Bo-kyung, public rallies remained intense at a number of different locations.
That's right, Jung-min. Behind me were around 300 supporters of Yoon protesting against the CIO, and around 1,000 supporters of Yoon have also been rallying in front of this whole detention center where President Yoon is currently chanting things like "Release the President." Just 10 meters away from the pro-Yoon protests were also those in favor of Yoon's impeachment, having a banner criticizing the declaration of martial law. Pro-Yoon protests are taking place in front of the Seoul Western District Court as well, where the detention warrant was requested. That is all I have for now. Back to Jung-min.
That was our Kim Bo-kyung reporting live from the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. The ruling and opposition parties are locking horns over the disputed bill to appoint a special counsel to investigate President Yoon's martial law declaration. This is raising questions about whether a last-minute agreement can be reached before midnight, the deadline set by the opposition. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young is on the line with the latest. Ha-young, how are the talks unfolding?
Jung-min, the rival political parties have yet to reach a final agreement. An official from the National Assembly Speaker's office told reporters that agreements had been reached on some issues, but the talks are still ongoing due to major differences. And the official declined to elaborate on these. And floor leaders of the two parties sat down at the negotiating table Friday afternoon with the National Assembly Speaker presiding to discuss a bill to launch a special counsel investigation into President Yoon's short-lived imposition of martial law. And this comes after the ruling People Power Party proposed its own version of the bill, while the opposition pushed its already prepared bill. And on Friday morning, PPP floor leader Kwon Song-dong said there was no need for the bill since most key figures, including President Yoon, have already been arrested or indicted. And he explained that the party proposed its own version of the special counsel bill as it was compelled to choose the worst option over the worst one. Take a listen.
This special counsel is pointless and serves no purpose. I urge the DP to withdraw the special counsel bill.
Democratic Party floor leader Park Chan-dae said the bill was needed to hold people accountable for a serious crime against democracy and the constitutional order. The DP has set the deadline for negotiations of midnight on Friday. And if no agreement is reached, it plans to hold a vote on its prepared special prosecutor bill. Take a listen.
I urge the PPP not to betray the people and to engage in negotiations sincerely.
How are the bills from each side different?
Well, the primary focus of the opposition's bill proposed earlier this month is to uncover whether President Yoon unlawfully instigated an insurrection and violated the constitution in the process. And the PPP's version, however, removes the allegations of insurrection and also that of the inducement of foreign aggression. And it aims to look into 5 specific allegations overall in comparison to the 11 presented by the opposition. And the PPP's bill also shortens the investigation period to a maximum of 110 days compared to the DP's 150. And as for the size of the investigation team, the PPP is pushing for a team of 58, while the DP is aiming for 155. And meanwhile, ahead of the talks, Assembly Speaker Won-sik urged both parties to complete the negotiations by Friday and do their best to pass the agreed bill.
If we can't reach an agreement easily, we'll do our best, even if it takes working until midnight.
While all eyes are on whether they can reach an agreement by the deadline, the DP is expected to pass its own bill if the talks fail. And that's all I have for now. Jung-min.
All right, thanks, Ha-young, for the updates. Korea's political instability appears to be casting a darker cloud of uncertainty over its economy. Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea is seeing greater downside risks to its economy as uncertainties grow both at home and abroad. The somber assessments from the latest Economic Green Book, a monthly economic assessment report released by the Finance Ministry on Friday.
The term concerns about increased downside risks was previously used, but has now been replaced with greater downside pressure. This change reflects the negative trends observed across industries during both October and November.
It presents a bleaker outlook compared to last month's report when the government omitted the phrase economic recovery for the first time in over a year, as January's report also includes concerns about employment, an area where the government had previously been largely optimistic. In December, South Korea saw its first year-on-year decrease in employment figures in more than 3 years, as a downturn in industrial activity has begun to spill over into the labor market. This was mainly attributed to a larger drop in employment in the manufacturing sector last month, which continued to see a decline for the 6th straight month, and the construction sector for 8 consecutive months. This comes as industrial output in November dropped 0.4% compared to the previous month, as the services and construction sectors remained weak, marking a fall for the third straight month. Services output declined by 0.2%, driven by decreases in the finance and insurance sectors. The construction sector also experienced a drop in production for the 7th consecutive month as building activity slowed, setting a new record for the longest continuous downturn since 1997. But retail sales, an indicator of consumer spending, rebounded by 0.4% compared to the previous month after seeing declines in both September and October. The Finance Ministry official said the month's report also placed less emphasis on concerns about inflation, as figures for December showed that consumer prices rose 1.9% year-on-year, marking the 4th consecutive month of inflation under the 2% mark. But with continued political unrest in the country as well as mounting concerns about potential changes in the trade environment during President-elect Donald Trump's second term, the government pledged to collaborate with relevant agencies and swiftly implement economic policy plans for 2025 to ensure economic stability. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., with only a few days left until Donald Trump's inauguration next week, eyes are now on the message he will deliver and who will attend the event. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has the details.
Security preparations are underway in Washington, D.C. as the city prepares for Trump's second inauguration that will take place on January 20th. More than 48 kilometers of fencing are being set up, and officials are on high alert, especially since the president-elect survived 2 apparent assassination attempts during his campaign.
More than 30 miles of anti-scale fence will be used for the inauguration, more than any other NSSE ever before. The Secret Service is...
The inauguration day includes a formal swearing-in ceremony, a parade to the White House, and musical performances. Trump will take the presidential oath of office and deliver his inaugural address, which he earlier said will be about unity. The 78-year-old has repeatedly expressed confidence about promising a golden age for the country.
We're approaching the dawn of America's golden age. It's going to be a golden age for America.
Meanwhile, ahead of the inauguration day, Trump's transition team shared an official portrait of the president-elect. Pictured in a blue suit and a blue tie, Trump's stone-faced expression is remarkably similar to his historic mugshot taken in August 2023. His new image stands in contrast to those of former presidents, and it's much sterner than the photo he used during his first term 8 years ago, in which he wore a wide smile. The inauguration is expected to draw former presidents, lawmakers, tech CEOs, as well as senior officials and leaders from countries around the world. From South Korea, Seoul's ambassador to Washington, Cho Yeon-dong, will be attending the event as the country's representative. 7 lawmakers from the ruling Conservative Party and the main opposition Democratic Party will also travel to the U.S. to take part in the inauguration. China announced Friday that its Vice President Han Zheng will attend the event in Washington, D.C., instead of the country's President Xi Jinping, which will mark the first time for a senior Chinese official. This comes after Trump sent an unusual invitation to Xi, a break from tradition, since foreign heads of state do not typically attend U.S. presidential inaugurations. As for Japan, Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya is set to travel to Washington to participate in the event. In a press conference, the Japanese top diplomat said he would make final arrangements for a summit between the country's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Donald Trump during his 5-day trip to the U.S. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, despite the sealing of a ceasefire deal that was supposed to start on Sunday local time, Israeli assaults against Hamas in Gaza continue to raise the Palestinian death toll. An Sung-jin has more.
Many rejoiced at the news of a 6-week ceasefire deal agreed between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. But just days before the deal is implemented on Sunday, Israel conducted more airstrikes in Gaza, killing at least 3 more Gazans and raising death toll to 86 since the news of the ceasefire agreement. According to Gaza's Civil Defense Service, the death toll includes 23 children and 27 women. During the same period, more than 250 Palestinians have been injured in the airstrikes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a security cabinet meeting on Friday to discuss and ratify the ceasefire, which was successfully agreed on. According to local media, in a statement from Netanyahu's office, the Prime Minister has been informed of the release of hostages and has signed the deal. This comes after the vote was initially postponed, with Netanyahu blaming a last-minute disagreement with Hamas for the delay. A full cabinet meeting to give final approval to the ceasefire deal is expected to take place on Saturday. And considering the legal procedures, the first hostages could be released as early as the 20th. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the deal will start on time despite what he called a last-minute loose end.
On the ceasefire, yes, I am confident, and I fully expect that implementation will begin, as we said, on Sunday. Look, it's not exactly surprising that in a process and a negotiation that has been this challenging and this fraught, you may get a loose end. We're tying up that loose end as we speak.
Following the ceasefire agreement, the European Union on Thursday pledged 120 million euros, or over 123 million US dollars, in aid for Palestine. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in a post on X, the ceasefire and hostage release agreement offers hope the region desperately needed, but added that Gaza's humanitarian situation remains grim. The aid will provide assistance to address acute food insecurity and malnutrition, healthcare assistance, water, sanitation and hygiene support, shelter and protection assistance. The latest humanitarian assistance to Gaza from the bloc brings the total value to over 460 million US dollars since 2023. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
Time now for our weekly arts and culture segment. We have our culture correspondent, Song Yujin in the studio. Welcome, Yujin.
Great to be here, Jungmin.
What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, as you'll already know, I'm sure, this year, 2025, marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan's colonial rule. So to really honor this historic milestone, a variety of stage and screen productions are currently introducing Korea's independence movement to the audiences. So for this week, here are two productions that introduce Korean freedom fighters, both on stage and on screen.
텐요리모 다카이 우리 이 말을 거부한다.
Four young men and women sing with passion, even with guns pressed into their backs. Their mission, to protect the Korean language from being erased during Japan's colonial rule. This homegrown musical, Yesterday's Poem, Tomorrow's Song, brings to life the struggles of young Korean independence fighters to defend their language and culture through poetry when forced to adopt Japanese. This is the first musical to use the poetry of Kim So-wol as its lyrics. Kim, one of Korea's most beloved poets, lived during the Japanese colonial period from 1910 to 1945.
Korea's independence movement was also about the power of words, poetry, and speech. We wanted to highlight not only the lyrical beauty of Kim So-wol's poetry, but also the deep emotions tied to our history and identity.
There are countless films, dramas, and performances about the independence movement. But our musical focuses on cultural efforts, young people who believed in fighting through creativity and expression.
Alongside the musical, other creative projects are honoring the sacrifices and resilience of independence activists, as this year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan. The film Baeksan, From Arirang to Palhae, is another example. The documentary tells a story of independence activist An Hee-jae, who ran a trading company that served as the financial backbone of the Korean provisional government in Shanghai.
An believed in nurturing people and fostering education to build a better future. He understood that independence required not just weapons, but also resources, networks, and platforms to sustain the movement. His trading company, similar to today's largest conglomerates, also helped train independence fighters.
Using advanced AI technology, director Jin vividly brought An's story to life on screen. Drone footage of Palhae Farm, a rice farm unfounded to support displaced Korean farmers and fund the independence movement, shows his vision. A haven where independence grew through empowerment.
While armed resistance played a significant role in the independence movement, we must also recognize there were many figures like Am, who worked behind the scenes to provide the critical resources that made such efforts possible.
These stories remind us that freedom was won through countless acts of courage in many forms.
I think these productions really show that the pen can be as mighty or sometimes mightier than the sword. Eugene, you mentioned earlier that there are several productions here in Korea focusing on the independence movements. What are other notable works?
Well, I would like to mention the film Harbin, starring star Korean actor Hyunbin. And since its release last Christmas Eve, the film has been topping the domestic box office for 24 consecutive days. And so far, it has sold more than 4 million tickets here in Korea. So to tell you a bit more about the film, it's a historical drama that tells the story of independence activist An Jung-gun, played by Hyunbin. And it focuses on his mission to assassinate Ito Hirobumi, Japan's first prime minister and then Resident General of Korea, at Harbin Station in China. And there's also some good news for our international viewers because the film is already being screened in theaters across the US, Indonesia, and Malaysia, and is set to premiere in Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan later this month.
And what are events that we can look forward to this year celebrating the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan?
Well, as it's still early in the year, not many have been announced yet, but at least the Culture Ministry announced that this year, museums under its wing will hold several exhibitions to mark the occasion. And also, as this year marks 60 years of normalization of diplomatic ties between South Korea and Japan, I think it will be interesting to see what kind of events will be held as the year unfolds.
I'm sure you're going to keep us updated throughout the year, Eugene. Thank you for the report.
My pleasure.
The air was freezing this morning again across the country. However, the temperatures rose up to 5 degrees Celsius during the daytime in Seoul, which is the typical winter level. With only clouds passing in the skies this weekend, milder weather than usual will continue. Meanwhile, the East Coast has been under a dry weather advisory for weeks. As well as a dry condition, strong wind is also blowing. It is important to be extra cautious due to the increased risk of wildfires. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at -4 degrees, Gwangju at -3 degrees. Daily highs will move up to around 10 degrees in most areas, with Daegu, Busan, and Jeju at 10 degrees. There won't be much cold next week, but snow is forecast in the central parts of the country on Monday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.